My teacher tried to ruin my future because she didn't like me, so I exposed her lies. You know how everyone has that one teacher who seems to hate their guts for no reason. For me, that teacher was Ms. Abernathy, EM18 now, A17. Year-old senior at the time, and honestly, I wasn't a bad student. I wasn't at the top of the class by any means, but I showed up, did my homework, and tried to stay out of trouble, but Ms. Abernathy looked at me like I was some kind of walking annoyance. From the first day of class she taught AP English Literature, and she was known for being tough, but fair. Except in my case, she skipped the fair part entirely. It started small. I'd answer a question in class and she'd interrupt halfway through, saying something like, "Let's hear from someone who actually read the material." When I turned, in essays, I'd get back pages full of red marks. She'd underline things that weren't even wrong. My grammar was perfectly fine and my ideas clear, but she would write vague comments like "this lacks depth" or "superficial interpretation." I tried asking her to explain what she meant, hoping maybe she'd give me a clue how to improve. She just sighed and said, "Jared, you should already know this at your level. That tone the kind people use when they're done with you." Made me feel about an inch tall. I remember one day after class, Violet, who sat next to me, leaned over and whispered, "You're not imagining it, Jared. She totally has it out for you." Violet was one of the best students in our grade, smart, calm, and observant, if she noticed. Then I knew it wasn't just in my head, things kept getting worse. When we did group discussions, she'd constantly skip me. If I raised my hand, she'd glance over me like I was invisible. Once, she even gave me some meanness on a paper she later read aloud in class as an example of mediocre effort. Except, and I'm not exaggerating, she quoted sentences that weren't even mine. I had written about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, focusing on the green light. She started reading a paragraph about Daisy's role as a fickle dream. That wasn't from my paper. I double-checked. When I tried to bring it up after class, she gave me this fake sweet smile and said, "Maybe you're just confused, Jared. I know what you submitted." That night, I tore through my Google Drive to make sure I hadn't gone crazy. My paper was still there, time-stamped and everything. And it was exactly as I remembered. It was the first time I thought that she might be trying to sabotage me. The thing is, I couldn't afford to fail that class. My GPA was borderline, and I needed good grades for my college scholarship. Without it, I couldn't go soar. I started saving everything. Every email, every assignment, every grade she gave me, and then came the presentation project, which was worth 40% of our final grade. We had to analyze a novel of our choice and present it to the class. I picked Fahrenheit 451. I spent weeks on it, reading, researching, designing slides, practicing late into the night. Violet even helped me polish it, making sure it flowed well. When presentation day came, I nailed it. Asterisk, people actually clapped, which doesn't happen in AP Lit. Even Violet said quietly, "That was awesome. She can't possibly mark you down for that." But when grades were posted the next day, I nearly fell out of my chair. She gave me a 62. Her only written feedback was, "Unprepared. Unclear understanding of themes." I remember staring at my laptop screen for what felt like forever. Unprepared. I had every slide, every quote, every analysis memorized. That's when Violet spoke up. "You need to talk to the principal," she said. "You've got evidence. You can't let her keep doing this." I hesitated. I didn't want to be that kid, the one who complains and gets labeled difficult. But then Ms. Abernathy crossed the line completely. A week later, she called me up in front of the class. She held my essay between two fingers like it was something disgusting. "Class," she said, "this is why plagiarism policies exist." My heart dropped. Jared here decided to copy entire sections from online sources. It's disappointing. The whole room went silent. Even Violet looked stunned. I tried to speak. That's not true. But she cut me off. You can discuss. At after class, Mr. Peterson. Everyone's eyes were on me. The whispering started immediately. I could feel my ears burning after class. I tried to defend myself. I showed her my drafts, my outline, my timestamps. She didn't even look. You've been coasting all year, Jared, she said coldly. You should take responsibility for your actions. And that's when I knew she wasn't going to stop until she ruined me that night. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my desk, staring at all my files, trying to figure out what to do. If this plagiarism accusation went on my record, it could destroy my college applications. It wasn't just about one teacher anymore, it was my future. So, I decided I'd fight it, but I couldn't do it alone. Violet called me that night. She said you need to gather everything, every version of your essays, the timestamps, the emails she sent you. We'll build a case. That was the first time I'd felt hope in weeks over. The next few days, we dug deep. I pulled up the version history on every Google Doc I'd ever written for her class. We screenshotted timestamps, drafts, even revision notes. Everything showed I'd written the paper from scratch. Then Violet did something brilliant. Let's see what she's accusing you of copying. We found the supposed plagiarized text she'd claimed. I lifted it from an online essay about the Scarlet Letter. Only problem? I'd written about Fahrenheit for 51. She hadn't even checked the source properly. She just decided I must have cheated and tried to frame me. Violet's face was red with anger. This is unreal. She's literally lying. That's when we made a plan. We printed everything, the timestamps, my drafts, the screenshots, and made a detailed report. We included side-by-side comparisons of my essay and the alleged source, showing they weren't even the same topic. But I knew if I just went straight to the principal, she could spin it as a misunderstanding. So we needed something stronger. Violet said, what if she's doing this to other students, too? That question changed everything. The next day at school, Violet quietly asked around. A few students said they'd gotten weird grades from Ms. Abernathy too. One girl said she'd been accused of copying a poem she'd written herself. Another said Ms. Abernathy lost her project and gave her a 0. It was a pattern. We gathered written statements, people willing to back up that she'd been unfair. By the end of the week, we had a small folder full of evidence and testimonies. But before we could submit it, Ms. Abernathy struck again. She called me into her classroom after school. The door clicked shut behind me. Her tone was low, sharp, and cold. You've been talking about me, she said, spreading rumors, trying to make me look bad. I froze. How did she know? You're treading on dangerous ground, Jared, she said. If you keep this up, you might find college applications harder than you expect. It wasn't even subtle. It was a threat. When I got home that day, I told Violet everything. She looked furious. She can't threaten you like that. She's digging her own grave. That's when we decided to go all in. No more waiting. We were taking it to the top, not just the principal, but the school district. We put together a detailed report, minus 27 pages long, with every bit of evidence. We included copies of emails, screenshots, statements from other students, and even a transcript of her supposed plagiarism claim. Violet proofread the entire thing, formatted it perfectly, and helped me submit it. We sent one copy to the principal, one to the superintendent, and one to the school board's ethics office, and then we waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. No calls, no emails, no updates. Ms. Abernathy kept acting smug, like she knew she was untouchable. Then on the fourth morning, I got called to the office. When I walked in, the principal, guidance counselor, and district investigator were all there. The look on their faces told me everything. They'd seen the evidence, and the walls around Ms. Abernathy were about to start crumbling. Walking into that office felt like walking into a courtroom. The air was tense, quiet, and heavy with the kind of silence that comes before something big. The principal, Mr. Harlan, motioned for me to sit. He looked at me over his glasses with that expression adults use when they're not sure if you're in trouble or a victim. Next to him was a woman in a dark blue suit. She introduced herself as Ms. Dawson, a district investigator. And across the table was the guidance counselor, Mrs. Patel, who gave me a small, reassuring smile. Ms. Dawson started right away. "Jared, we've reviewed your report. I need to ask you some questions about your allegations against Ms. Abernathy." I nodded, palms sweating. She went through everything, how long the issues had been happening, what I'd noticed when she accused me of plagiarism, how I'd gathered my evidence. I explained it all, step by step, showing them the documents Violet and I had compiled. At one point, Ms. Dawson leaned forward. "This level of documentation is impressive. You kept every file?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. I knew something was wrong. She gave a small, approving nod. When I finished, they thanked me and told me I could go before I left. Mrs. Patel stopped me at the door and said quietly, "Jared, whatever happens, you did the right thing by speaking up." That night, Violet called again. She sounded anxious, but proud. "Do you think they'll actually do something?" she asked. I wanted to believe yes, but part of me was terrified. Ms. Abernathy was a veteran teacher, over 20 years at the school. Highly respected, always running extracurriculars, writing recommendation letters for half the student body. Who were we compared to that? The next few days were weird. She was still teaching, but there was a tension in the air. Every time she looked at me, her smile seemed tighter. Every word she said to the class was clipped and forced. On Wednesday, an announcement came over the PA students in Ms. Abernathy's classes: "Please report to the auditorium for independent study." Today, we all shuffled down there confused, whispering to each other. Then I asked around. I learned she wasn't at school that day, personal leave, apparently. Violet leaned over and whispered they pulled her out. Sure enough, by the next morning, her name was gone from the teacher attendance board. Rumors spread fast. Some said she was suspended. Others said she was being reviewed. I tried not to get my hopes up. Investigations take time. But it felt like, for once, someone was finally listening. About a week later, Ms. Dawson called me in again. This time, she looked almost pleased with confirmed inconsistencies in several of Ms. Abernathy's grading records. She said, "And we've received additional student statements that align with your experiences." My heart raced. "So, does that mean?" She nodded slightly. "It means you were telling the truth." I don't even remember what I said after that. It was like a weight had lifted off me that I'd been carrying for months. But the relief didn't last long. The next morning, I got an email from Ms. Abernathy. It read, "Jared, I hope you're proud of yourself. You've made serious accusations that could destroy a person's career. Be careful what you wish for." That wasn't just unprofessional, it was intimidation. I immediately forwarded it to Ms. Dawson, who responded within the hour, "Thank you, Jared. Do not reply, we'll handle this." And they did. 2 days later, an official notice went out to all staff and students that Ms. Abernathy was being placed on administrative leave, pending disciplinary review. Could feel the shock ripple through the hallways. Everyone had thought she was untouchable. But even as the news spread, I didn't feel like celebrating yet. Because deep down, I knew people like her didn't go down quietly. She'd been manipulating students and staff for years. She had allies, other teachers and administrators who respected her, and I wasn't naive enough to think she wouldn't fight back. If you've ever been the kid who stands up to an adult in power, you'll understand what came next. Even when you're right, people don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable. The day after the announcement, I noticed teachers whispering in the hallway. Some looked at me with sympathy. Others avoided eye contact, completely violet, and I started getting weird comments from classmates too. Things like, "You really got her fired?" Or, "She wrote my college letter, what am I supposed to do now?" One guy even muttered, "Snitches ruin everything." It hurt, not because I regretted doing the right thing, but because people didn't see what she'd done. They only saw that a beloved teacher was gone. Violet had my back, though. She was fearless. Anytime someone said something, she stood up for me. He didn't get her fired. She did that herself. And slowly, people started to realize there was more to the story. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and it turned out worse for Ms. Abernathy than anyone expected. Ms. Dawson called me again, about 2 weeks later. She said they'd found multiple falsified grade records in the school system. Some grades had been manually changed. She had been downgrading students she didn't like, and boosting others she favored. And it wasn't just grades. Apparently, she'd also written false disciplinary notes about certain students' notes that went into permanent files. It was a pattern of manipulation spanning years. I remember sitting there stunned while Ms. Dawson explained everything. Then she added something that made my stomach twist. It looks like she tried to delete her emails and grading logs after we began our review. So not only had she lied, she'd tried to cover it up. At that point, the district had enough to take formal action. But before they announced anything, Ms. Abernathy requested a meeting with the board. It was her last chance to defend herself. They invited me to attend as a witness. I didn't want to at first. The idea of facing her again made me sick. But Violet said, "If you don't go, she'll twist the story. You deserve to tell the truth." So I agreed. The meeting was in the district's conference room. About a dozen people in suits were sitting inside. When I walked in, Ms. Abernathy was already sitting there. She looked different, smaller somehow, but still wearing that smug, superior expression. When it was her turn to speak, she said all the things you'd expect: that she was a dedicated teacher, that the students misunderstood her, that any errors were honest mistakes. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Jared has been a troubled student from the beginning. He's had issues with authority, and it's unfortunate that he's dragged others into his personal grudge." I clenched my fists under the table. When it was my turn, I stayed calm. I explained everything clearly: the false accusations, the mismatched plagiarism claim, the intimidation email. I showed them the evidence Violet and I had gathered. When I finished, Ms. Dawson presented the district's findings, the falsified grades, the deleted records, the written complaints from other students. By the time she was done, Ms. Abernathy's face had gone pale. The room was silent. Then the superintendent said, "Ms. Abernathy, based on the evidence, we are recommending your immediate termination and formal report to the state licensing board." That was it. After 20 years of teaching, her career was over. Not because of me, but because of what she'd done to everyone. When I walked out of that room, Violet was waiting for me in the hallway. She grinned and said, "You did it. You actually did it." I finally smiled, not because I'd won, but because the truth had. After the board meeting, it felt like the entire school took a collective breath it didn't know it had been holding. For months, Ms. Abernathy's presence had loomed like a shadow, cold, judgmental, untouchable. And suddenly, She was gone at first. People didn't know what to do with the news. Rumors ran wild. Some said she'd quit in protest, others said she was taking a sabbatical, and a few whispered that she'd been escorted out by district officials. The truth that she'd been fired for falsifying grades, intimidating students, and lying didn't reach everyone at once. But when it did, it hit like a shockwave. Her classroom door stayed locked for a week. One afternoon, I walked past it. On my way to study hall, the windows were covered with paper, and her nameplate had been removed. The absence was eerie, like she'd been erased. Overnight students kept glancing at me in the hallways, whispering, staring a little too long before pretending not to. A few avoided me altogether, unsure of what to say. Some of the seniors who'd loved her were angry. One guy in my homeroom muttered under his breath, "You couldn't just leave it alone, could you?" Another girl rolled her eyes when I walked by and said to her friend, "He just wanted attention." It stung more than I wanted to admit. But every time I felt that doubt creeping in, I remembered what Violet said. "You did the right thing. You didn't make her do those things." Still, the social tension was real. Teachers acted weird around me too, polite and careful, like I was holding a recording device or something. Some were overly nice, while others just kept their distance. Then, one morning, I found a note in my locker. It was on plain-lined paper, folded in half. It said, "Thank you for speaking up." She ruined my grade junior year, and I never said anything. You did what I was too scared to do. There was no name. Just that single, anonymous message. I kept it in my backpack for weeks. After that, Violet was the only person who didn't treat me differently. We'd meet up after school and walk home together. She'd crack jokes, bring snacks, and somehow make everything feel normal again. "It's wild," she said one afternoon, tossing a granola bar at me. "Everyone's acting like they didn't know what she was like." I shrugged. "People only believe things when it's safe to." She smirked. "Guess you made it safe then." It was strange hearing that. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd just barely survived something exhausting. A week later, the principal called me to his office again. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he was smiling. "Jared," he said, "I wanted to thank you personally. The district reviewed everything, and your report helped us identify serious problems in our grade management system. Because of you, we're putting new checks in place so this can't happen again." He handed me a letter in an envelope embossed with the district logo. It was a letter of commendation signed by the superintendent himself. Then he added something that caught me completely off guard. "Also, I've written you a personal recommendation for your college applications. It's the least we can do." I didn't know what to say. I think I just nodded like an idiot, gripping that envelope like it was made of gold. The next week, a new teacher took over Ms. Abernathy's classes. Her name was Mrs. Miller, and she was kind. "That alone felt surreal. The first day," she said, "I know you've all been through a difficult situation. My only goal is to make sure you feel safe learning again." And she meant it. When I turned in my first essay to her, she actually left helpful comments. She encouraged me, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked me for my effort. I almost didn't know how to react. It was like remembering what fair treatment felt like after living without it for so long. 2 weeks later, I got another email from Ms. Dawson. She told me the state licensing board had officially reviewed Ms. Abernathy's case. Her teaching certificate had been revoked permanently. That meant she couldn't teach in any public school again. She could never hurt another student again. It's been a full year since everything happened. And sometimes, I still wake up remembering the way she looked at me that day in class, like I was worthless. But then I remember how it ended, and I smile. I'm in college, now in my first year at a university. I honestly didn't think I'd get into any good colleges after all that chaos, and guess what? I'm majoring in English. The irony isn't lost on me. When people hear my major, they sometimes ask, Did you always love reading? And I usually say yes. But what I don't tell them is that for a while, I almost gave it up. Now every time I write an essay or raise my hand in class, I remind myself that I earned the right to be there. Violet is still one of my closest friends. We go for coffee whenever I'm home on break. She's studying communications now, says she wants to work in education reform someday. Can't say I'm surprised every time we meet up. She brings up new rumors she hears about the old days. Apparently, more students have started speaking up about unfair treatment in different schools. The district's policy change created a ripple effect. And it all started with that one folder of evidence we built together at her kitchen table sometimes. When we're sitting there laughing about something random, I think back to that awful moment when Ms. Abernathy accused me of plagiarism, and then I remember how close I came to giving up. But I didn't, because Violet believed in me when no one else did. He thought about graduation day a few nights ago. It was the last time I walked through that school before heading off to college. It was sunny and loud, everyone cheering, parents taking pictures when they called my name. I walked across the stage and shook the principal's hand. He leaned in and said softly, "You changed this place for the better, Jared." Never doubt that. After the ceremony, I found Violet by the bleachers. She was in her cap and gown, smiling like she'd just run a marathon and won. Without saying anything, she held up her phone, the news site on it, showing a headline.
Local district
Implements new anti-bias grading standards after student investigation. Underneath was a quote from the superintendent. A student's courage to speak up inspired us to look inward and do better. No names, no credit, just truth. And that was enough. We stood there in the fading sunlight, the crowd buzzing around us, and I finally felt free. You ever think about her? Violet asked. Sometimes, I said. But not in the way I used to. You don't hate her? I shook my head. No. I just feel sorry for her. She had all that power and used it to make people small. And in the end, it made her smaller than anyone. Violet smiled at that. That's actually kind of poetic. Guess I did learn something in English class after all, I said, and she laughed as we walked off the field. I realized something I hadn't before. The whole ordeal wasn't just about one bad teacher. It was about learning to stand up, to refuse to be silenced, even when everyone tells you to stay quiet. Ms. Abernathy tried to take away my future, but she only ended up teaching me how to protect it. And maybe, in a twisted way, that's the last lesson she ever gave me.